Welcome to the next episode of the ChrisRodMaxShow. This week, we're back with more exciting AI news. And I think there's a lot of things going on, folks. We're going to cover a little bit on GPT-5. I think it's been out for like roughly 10 days now based on the last release. And then, about some of the reaction. Love to get both your thoughts if you get your hands on it. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the safety, the usage cap, the jailbreaks of GPT-5. And then we'll spend some time talk about the distribution wars that's going on with all the different AI platforms. With that, there's a little bit of a Perplexity's bid for Google Chrome. Love to get both your thoughts on this. Very interesting. And lastly, it's on President Trump's 15% revenue allocation for Nvidia AMD to sell chips to to China. And with that, let's jump straight in. So first off, I guess, probably everyone knows this, there are a lot of anticipation for GPT-5 model. I think it has been some time since the last model update. I guess I'd love to get both your thoughts. What are your views on them? I've played around with it. I have some views on them, but love to get, both your, I guess, first cut of what you think. And maybe I'll start with you, Rob.
Yes, so the anticipation is rather for enterprise rollout. Opinions divided. For certain tasks, you can see improvements. I, for example, use it quite a bit for my coding, and I do notice that now it got smarter. It can deduce things that are not there, like they are not explicit. In that part, I think it's quite good. But then there's how most people use it, which is as some sort of advisor, coach, and there is more like disappointment. People got quite used to praising you. You're a rock star and so on, right? For the most minimal things. And now it's got with GPT-5. It's a much more to the point. Quite some people are not happy about that. There are all these use cases with girlfriends and boyfriends. They were also agreeing with you, telling you nice things. And that was gone with GPT-5. There was even a petition on change.org saying, bring the model back. In all the subreddits for AI girlfriends, people were going crazy, saying, no, my girlfriend is gone, she died. And OpenAI was forced to bring back older models and even acknowledge unhealthy dependencies with AI because it's just telling you what you want to hear. And with GPT-5, this disappeared. Will that be better for an enterprise? Maybe. I guess you just want to have the answer. But even that, on just a pure answering, so quality of answers, for most use cases, GPT-5 is not better than previous models, which also goes to show a little bit that maybe we're plateauing there in what we can achieve.
In my opinion, I feel like OpenAI always does the 80-20 rule, whereby they ship something that's 80% done, and then they sort of improve on people's ranting and feedback. That is probably something that could explain, Rod, the perception you gathered. And I would actually very much agree with you. I think the reviews so far have been mixed. There are a couple of things that ChatGPT 5.0 is better. But then again, also in a lot of fields, people were, again, making fun of ChatGPT not being able to calculate something very simplistic, some decimal numbers, adding them together, led to something completely bogus. So we see that, here and there, it's not really performing. And yet there are fields, obviously, where it got sharpened. I think one of the most noticeable things I've come across is the memory. So being even more in tune with previous conversations and being able to recall those, I think is something that I've noticed. But is it really now deserving a new number instead of 4.3 or 4.4? I'm not sure. But again, I feel like it's one of those kind of tactics where ChatGPT or OpenAI will just iterate based on the feedback that they give or they receive. Max, what about yourself? What do you think about that?
I've been using a lot of O3 Pro just for all sorts of reasoning for work and for searching for just writing things. And my general sense is GPT-5 is not really a step change compared to previous models, at least based on what I'm trying to do. It doesn't really give me more accurate information, and it doesn't really, I don't know about the pleasantries. I don't really think about it that much, but I guess pleasantries was important for some people. But I try to basically tell my AI agents to act a certain way, so the pleasantries somehow doesn't reflect anyway. So that's one. And I think the third thing I would say about ChatGPT 5, I think it's definitely cheaper and faster. I would say. But in terms of the output, I really don't know if it's a step change for me as yet. At least based on the few things that I've been trying on the last few weeks or so. So yeah, I think so far I'm still trying. I think it's faster from a pro reasoning perspective. But I haven't been able to test like how accurate it is based on the different outputs. Which means to take an O3 Pro and put a 5 Pro and try to figure them out. So there's that. I think the next thing is interesting about GPT-5 rolling out was available at the same time from an enterprise perspective via Copilot. I think this is probably why Microsoft invested at the first place. I guess love to hear both your thoughts on the rollout timing and how do you think about how I guess all the different LLMs are trying to position themselves because everyone is starting to go down the I would say the enterprise route, right? So you have the Anthropic Claude try to go vertical, and then you have the Microsoft, the OpenAI trying to go down the I would say enterprise route, right? So really making sure that their models are available. One of my biggest takeaway there is like, are they losing now from a releasing the same time with Microsoft with OpenAI? Or they're just playing the long game in which because Microsoft is all over the world anyway, so regardless what you do, you have to go through them. I would love to get both your thoughts. Maybe Rod, I'll start with you on the distribution side of things. How do you think about OpenAI positioning themselves, partnering up with Microsoft, etc., especially on the enterprise side?
So they've been associated so since day one, right? Like they've been so Microsoft has been an investor, and also not only that, but for a long time it was the only way how people could access OpenAI models without sharing data with OpenAI itself. I guess here rather like the point's more about this specialization of different models and agents and software. So where like Claude Anthropic is quite good for like coding tasks, it's really good for like writing and so on, but it's not the general assistant, it's not the general, so like all rounder. Whereas the GPT models with OpenAI, they're heavily positioned as, let's say, can do a bit of everything, but maybe not necessarily all of them really good. They also can generate like images, can generate also some other formats that Claude can't. And then specifically for these assistants, you have the focus as well on like a actual personal assistant, right? With a memory that you can always ask or remember so that we discuss about this meeting, what do you think? Whereas with other offerings in the market, every time you start a new conversation, then it's like a clean slate. So here I only see that this is continuing happening in that, of course, also Microsoft as well. They want to have some angle that's a bit different. There's not, let's say, just the same thing. It's not like a licenses version that it has no difference. There's no differentiator with what OpenAI offers. And yeah, in their case, it's more like tailored towards, of course, like their customer base. They also have like their own, so here Azure Copilot and so on, so they have like their own thing. But that's just specialization and try to differentiate yourself from something that actually you're licensing from a third party.
I have two views on that. So your question was a little bit like, okay, what's sort of the consequence of OpenAI launching at the same time, also via Microsoft channels across Copilot and all the Microsoft products? Honestly speaking, I think the only person or the only team that actually has to do some homework is probably the compliance team, as you were mentioning earlier, right? Like, and to kind of assess whatever they need to assess. I do believe from a user perspective, I would actually bet my money on it that hardly anyone would notice the difference. And the reason I say that is because I think it's not like all the people the employees in a corporate that uses Microsoft Suite are at a level of sophistication when it comes to prompting and using AI in their day-to-day work. So I would say dropping a new model that arguably is maybe better, but we don't know for sure, will not make a big difference. The fact that there's anyways a general lack of education when it comes to using AI in a workplace. So I feel like it's almost like you have to solve for that fundamental issue or problem, which is how should an organization use AI for what workflows, for what kind of like tasks, how is this going to change the relationship between your employees, your AI agent? Much more challenging than ChatGPT 5.0 via that channel. From a user perspective, will not make a big difference.
Interesting. I think one thing came to my mind when you said that is what will move the needle for them is not just releasing new models, it's really getting people to adopt those models that are already out there. Because at the moment, the models don't quite improve that step change, or it's not going to give you something entirely brand new. But it's more of adopting what already we have at the moment. Interesting.
And if I can add to that, actually, I think there's a hypothesis, and Rod and I, we spoke about that with Adi last time. It should be completely model agnostic. Like as a user, you shouldn't need to choose between, I don't know, Gemini, whatever the number is right now, and ChatGPT 3.0, 4.0, whatever it is. It should be almost like context based, and it should be completely model agnostic. So I think overall, that's almost like the wrong question to ask the user.
Interesting. I think that flows, I guess, a little bit well to your point around compliance. Second news, GPT-5 or message cap. A Black Hat event, they demonstrate a jailbreak prompt that bypassed the safety layer of OpenAI. Every time you release a model, the compliance folks need to understand what they're releasing. From an end user perspective, it's probably the same. It doesn't really change much. Best thing is to do some sort of like, forward deploy engineering and get people into those organizations, build those AI agents for them, and make sure they're so sticky from a corporate perspective. Given your exposure to some of your, I guess, different startups with people that are building in this space, I guess, how are they thinking about, adopting those models on latest models versus how their clients are thinking about adopting those latest models?
The challenge is always that everything's so baked in the prompt, and people are reporting that. So how you try to migrate here to GPT-5, and then all of a sudden many of the prompts that you have ready for previous models, they aren't working anymore. And that makes any transition, any adoption of new models, something that can be done, let's say, just flipping a button or just changing one line on something. It has to be a much more thoughtful approach. Then on top of that, if we're here talking that all of a sudden, not only it's about quality performance that changes, or the type of areas where the models there are worse, but rather also how the output is formulated. And we're saying, hey, previous models were like kinder towards you, always agreeing with you, and so on, and people got used to that. And all of a sudden, you have something that is very different in their output. Then you have also other considerations there, not only about performance itself, but rather more about user experience and what users prefer. So from like the companies I've been talking to, I gotta say that on one side, adoption has been more as it's like internal tooling, meaning so here using these models, so GPT-5 as like a coding assistant. But even then, many say that, for example, Anthropic Claude continues being a better option for the coding, and therefore they see no need to start using here GPT-5. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and I would say for the first time, both so a little bit like OpenAI haters and OpenAI lovers, they were not super thrilled with this release. It was like a little lukewarm.
Interesting. I think what you were talking there, I was thinking about, I would say like the Grok situation where Grok obviously came out and criticized Elon Musk on its own, and then Elon Musk basically saying that this is actually a good thing because even the model that he built, it's not biased. Compliance stuff that we were talking about earlier. I guess this is maybe a philosophical question, right? Do you actually censor it or not? Do you actually add some sort of cap to it or not on those different models? If they have raw horsepower that OpenAI lovers take it on, then will that make a difference? But with the cap, maybe it would just limit it a little bit. On the compliance side of things, I think Chris Rod, I don't know what's your view on this, right? If you release the latest models, do you go full grok, really just let people take the tech and run with it? Or do you go down that path of some sort of rate limiting on the model? I'm just interesting to hear this because obviously the consequences of going down the grok would be, some organization will bring it on. But at the same time, for AI to be truly powerful, you also need to experiment to know what's the limit in a way.
I always think that we're approaching the limit of progress, and then I'm surprised a lot of the improved in engineering in how to make a better experience. For example, ChatGPT became an assistant with memory, or completely changed the experience. As a product, it got so much better, even though the GPT-5, we might be thinking we are plateauing and we might not see massive improvements. So we will not see here massive surprises, and maybe like AGI is not as close as we might believe. At the same time, there are other levers that all these companies can pull in order to improve the user experience. And then there are like other things that they're like so developing, right? So, for example, like recently here, Apple apparently is announcing some hardware devices soon that may like a little robot that will help you and will be connected to some AI. And there's still so many directions where people can branch out, where companies will be like headed. And I find it hard to believe that this means that we'll be plateauing. Plus, on top, if we add like all this discussion about so researchers and engineers getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars, then at the very least, from a PR perspective, they need to have some narrative. So how are they justifying that they're paying people so astronomical amounts if we're headed towards no progress? We'll have reached a dead end.
I guess enterprises and IT teams need to catch up on security and safety. But it doesn't really relate to 5.0 necessarily, right? Like it could be any model, to be honest. But I think that's also in part the reason why there's always this stressful haggle or tension between, are you going to go early adopter, right, as a company, and you sort of like have the latest tech, and is that going to advance you in terms of, I don't know, a competitive advantage? Or are you really testing it to the max and make sure that, it is safe, up to standard, etc., before you like roll it out into your company? I think with AI, the two strategies that you see is either it is building on older models or more reliable models, or it goes through, more reputable vendors such as a Microsoft, right? Where you can actually at least blame it on a big company and sue them for it if something happens. I think that's one strategy that you see. So almost all bigger companies would actually go with bigger tech companies in order to make sure that nothing breaks. I think the second strategy that you see is sort of like this on-premise, sort of like off the grid type of strategy where companies try to stay safe by just having the model somehow locally, not in the cloud, and be able to like work with, proprietary enterprise data this way.
Yeah, that's interesting. It comes back to the old adage of nobody gets fired for hiring IBM. I think that nowadays nobody gets fired for hiring Microsoft. So I guess Microsoft became IBM after replacing IBM. I think that's I guess next thing that I have in my mind is really around the AI platform distribution wars, if you will. I just realized on my phone, I think you have Gemini plus on my normal Google, but at the same time, your Siri has been updating itself. And then we also saw Perplexity trying to acquire Chrome. Like for me, those are all somehow tied to each other, right? Those who owns those physical devices, they can get to you as an end user pretty quickly. I'd love to hear, I guess, what are your views on those distribution platform? I think especially on the consumer side of things. And Rod, you mentioned, Apple's will come out with some sort of devices. Meta is coming out with, their glasses, Oakley and Ray-Ban. So it's a mix of a few of all these, different devices for AI distribution, if you will. I don't even know how to think about this, right? From a structurally perspective, it's like whatever devices that we hold, we just have to assume the AI is going to be there. And then those devices will change in form. And the services that you want from AI, depending on what they are, will also be delivered via that. Rod, what are your views on this?
We had a dedicated episode on AI browsers, and that's a good reason. So for everyone who's listening, to subscribe and then look at our archive and then look what we're saying there. And there we were talking about how there are two camps here. Those who say, hey, browsers are the gateway to the internet. Control the browser, you control the user experience and so on. Could argue the browser is just commodity. Safari, if it's Chrome, whatever it is. It might be a BPR stunt for 30 billion, but Perplexity is not even worth that. But then they say that they have been able to get approval from investors that they will be able to raise a round and they'll be able to finance this and so on. In any case, Perplexity is an AI search engine, and then they think, hey, if Chrome worked really well for Google, then why? And now Google has likely to divest it because of all this antitrust and anti-monopoly, so regulation, debates, so lawsuits going on and so on. Then they say, hey, this is a good opportunity for us to get basically a prime real estate in everyone's home screen. Would that make sense? Maybe, maybe not. I think as well that the other thing that we see here is how we are just, in the case of like a ChatGPT, you just go to ChatGPT, you stay there. You're not like browsing anymore, you're not looking at URLs, you don't need on your browser, just download the app. I'm surprised, for example, how more and more I see people that talk to ChatGPT just by voice. They open the app and they're just talking to it as a voice assistant, like as Siri was supposed to look like. And they're not browsing or they just purely communicate with voice with ChatGPT.
Somehow this news slipped my mind, but I mean, their valuation is at 14 billion and they bid for 34.5 billion. And I think if I remember correctly, Google Chrome was a pet project by someone in Google, started during the famous, 80-20 rule that they had, whereby Friday afternoons were for people to dabble and explore. And I think that's how Chrome was actually built by someone. And it was always meant to be a free tool. And now it's valued at 34.5 billion, which is crazy, first of all. I think the second thing is Perplexity actually dropped its own browser called Comet browser. I think it's only available to enterprises, and it seems to be, I'm not sure. Like the way I look at it, it's almost like a chatbot, chat window that appears at the right moment. For example, I think one of the use cases they show is when you want to like organize an itinerary on Google Maps, basically does an agentic process flow whereby it just like looks at Google Maps and finds the right landmarks and so forth and so forth. And then you get like the route and everything. Actually, something that I think we've actually spoken about like a year ago when it was about like, oh, AI could now, help my travel itinerary. Why I'm talking about this is because I feel like it's very rudimentary. It's kind of like someone just like put a chatbot into a Chrome browser, more or less. And so maybe that's the reason why Perplexity is now thinking about buying Google Chrome. But I think to a more fundamental point here, which is what is the right interface, and also that we spoke about quite a bit. I actually also think about the iPhone and that being one of a hell of a distribution channel for anything AI, and Apple actually struggling to come up with somewhat of a robust AI model. I'm wondering, and Max, I would love your view on this, is who do you think has the bigger negotiation power? Is it Apple that actually very much dominates this very valuable distribution channel, or is it the LLM models that hold the power, and if Apple doesn't comply, they will just find another way to get to the user? What do you think?
Who do I think has the most power? I think depending on the timing. So as of now, especially when things are just starting to heat up, I believe Apple still holds a lot of the power at the moment because they can always take you off, take you on, decide which LLMs to put on. And I think based on the latest data, if I'm not wrong, ChatGPT is still like 65% of the market or something like that. So who is going to take the second place? Really entirely depends. So I believe the distribution power of Apple is still very strong, at least based on what's happening right now. Second thing is, I think as time goes by, if ChatGPT becomes even more accessible via different types of devices, I suspect human behavior will change, aka to what Rod was talking about around the voice stuff, right? So, for example, I have a Google speaker at home. I speak to it to turn on lights and turn off lights at the moment and ask them about weather. As time goes by, I would want it to be smarter to help me plan all those stuff. So then suddenly my access to AI solutions is no longer just on my phone. It could also via other devices. So over time, I think depending on what users' behavior are like, I think that only then it will change, I would call Apple's strength in this market. I don't know if that answers your question, Chris. At least that's how I'm seeing it right now. Because I see it as supply and demand, different, or should I say, competitive advantage. Apple definitely has the user mindshare, at least from a device perspective. ChatGPT still have the user mindshare from a new AI perspective. But if that mindshare started changing away from your ChatGPT from my phone over to other devices, I think that will start changing the conversation. Couple of things I want to point out really quickly. I think as you guys talk, as Chris was talking about Perplexity and Chrome, they value at Chrome 35 billion. So according to just 2 days ago, CNBC, someone from Raymond James, a big bank slash wealth management based out in the US. I think they value Chrome to be around 50 billion because it brings in about 35% of Google's search revenue. So there's that. My general sense around Perplexity, trying to bid to buy Chrome is, to Rod's point, a little bit of a PR stunt. I don't know if they'll ever get it, even with all the different regulatory requirements. Like, even if Google wants to sell it, they won't sell to Perplexity, which is blatantly trying to compete with Google. My general sense is it's actually smarter to even sell to Apple. Right? Like, because you're not blatantly trying to compete on the search, and then should continue putting that search thing like Google search in Safari and in Chrome. So that actually might be a better play. Because one thing, if I'm Google, I wouldn't sell it to someone that's trying to compete with me and blatantly trying to compete with me. Because Perplexity came out and said that I want to beat Google. We want to be the next Google with AI search. That's one thing. Second thing is I've heard mixed reviews about Perplexity and searching with Perplexity. As a product, I actually would be interested to hear both your views. Right? What do you think of Perplexity search in general? Like, I just don't know if it has taken off. And then you could do some of the searches you do on Perplexity on Google, ChatGPT. Everything else I want instant, I'll go Google. So not quite sure about the positioning. So maybe Chris, yeah.
Interesting. When you say Perplexity search, are you talking about just the chat window where you search stuff?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just in general, right? Because that's the main product they're positioning themselves.
Honestly speaking, I feel like nowadays I just use ChatGPT just because it's one platform and I don't have to think about dispense extra brain power just to like figure out which model I go for. Again, I think in an ideal world, it should be completely agnostic. I just want to have the best answer to my question. But I do catch myself using Google search less and less. I think the only reason why I would be using Google search is if I was to look for a certain website. So really when it comes to this type of like search use case, whereas if it's just about knowledge, I'd probably just go to ChatGPT, any other creative type of work, brainstorming, etc. And I think that works for, I would say, 80% of use cases. I think where I do use Google search in a way is on Google Maps. I think even ChatGPT 5.0, like it actually integrates, so you may or may not see the Google map and so forth. But I feel like it's not as reliable just yet, to the extent that I just go to Google Maps and it has all this very sticky, very real time information on it.
Yeah. How about Rod? What's your view around, I guess, Perplexity's search? I don't know if it's a super strong product, at least not to me as an end user. Um, so what do you think, Rod?
I use it from time to time, but this is again something where, I mean, I know people who use it basically all day. So they have, let's say, two AI and so the household application. One is, of course, ChatGPT, and the one is Perplexity. And ChatGPT serves like an advisor, and then Perplexity as like a good alternative. In my case, I find that one I'm perfectly fine. So here with Google, I do not need a replacement, especially because all these AI searches, they're just slow. I just want to see something in seconds, and I don't want to wait I don't know, like half a minute, 1 minute, whatever it is, so to find my solution to my problem. And there are things also, I guess, just habit. So why use Perplexity? But with that said, I do use it, for example, if I want, especially research for a topic, right? So I want to understand something better and so on. I find all these deep research functionality that Perplexity offers among the best. The ChatGPT has something, but it's kind of like lazy and it's not really like a deep research what it's doing. And Claude, I find that it has something, but then it goes kind of like too eager, too crazy, and then at some point you run out of messages, you run out of credits because it uses too much of that. Gemini is also quite good, but then again, you need to pay for Gemini unless you're using it for like your company or something. And here is Perplexity offers this very good balance in good results. It is good quality, relatively fast for that, and so on. But the classical, for example, if you're looking for, I don't know, I want to buy like a laptop for like, I don't know, like 1,000 euros at most, then I find that just using Google is still the faster option.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Maybe I just don't use Perplexity enough from a deep research perspective. I should probably try it because anything deep research, I just default to ChatGPT. I wanted to mention it's just around a podcast that I've listened to by Ben Thompson on Trajectory. He was just talking about how, while Apple, we always think Apple not being the first, out of the in the market to create something new, but he is arguing that Apple has always come up with the latest technology, right? So even the iPhone, for example, they were the first, and somehow they captured mindshare, and then Android came second, and eventually became, while they're dominant from a OS perspective, but they're not really dominant from a product slash capture mindshare perspective. And then he also argued that in Apple's case, they also came out, let's say with the MacBook, for example, it's very slickly designed. Well, they're not the first, but they're really the first to pull all their hardware and software together and make it all in one pack. So if we think about AI as a new software, so will Apple then be able to combine the hardware and the software and release a new product again? So we do not know. That's why this thought came about when Rod mentioned that Apple might come up with a new hardware from a distribution perspective. So I don't know if both of you have any views on this, right? So Meta is obviously trying, really crazily, and I assume they would eventually install that thing onto any of those glasses. Um, but yeah, if any of you have any views on how Apple position themselves, as well as they're not really a fast follower for markets that they've been dominating.
I wonder what happened to Vision Pro, the very expensive goggle thingy. Like, have you ever tried it?
No, I haven't seen one. Try it, Max. Have you seen one like in the wild, not in some store?
Not in the store, but we used to have that in the office. So I've tried it. Yeah. So it was kind of fun. But 3K is a very steep price, just saying. So I don't know what is going on with Vision Pro. It's a good question.
No, so here I also have no idea. Like first, I do not know anyone who owns one. Second, I never even seen on the street or anywhere else someone wearing that. And third, I'm not sure if it'll ever go beyond some sort of like niche novelty thing. Uh, but for that reason, and also what we've been discussing across multiple shows of how Apple, they do not have yet anything that is really AI besides some improvements on functionality, like remove someone from this picture or like a better way how to capture text from an image and so on. They don't really have like an assistant, like a flagship, right? That's why they've been touting that. So in the next year and then the year after, they'll be having some AI hardware releases. And there are rumors that apparently there's this sort of like an iPad that is plugged to like a robotic arm. So I picture that as there was, I think 10 years ago, there was like an iMac that it was basically that. It had like its base, had like a little arm, of course, non-robotic, and then it was the display itself. So I picture something like that, that it's basically something that you put on your desk or your kitchen, and then it moves and it can flips and it can help you to do things. That's how I'm picturing that. That's apparently what is supposed to be this flagship Apple AI device that they want to launch next year.
But I found it so interesting, right? If they release that, what's the positioning gonna be like? I'm just interested to think about like the business strategy. What's the rationale? Maybe they felt that they have lost out on the consumer side and tried to come up with something more on the robotic, specific um um channel, if you will.
I remember there was one that was quite large. So from some CMU professor that was like for children. That the idea was, okay, you put like in your children's room, and so this display that is attached to like some computer with some AI and so on, and then this can become like your friend, and yeah, you can play games, you can learn and so on, right? And then probably have all these other companies have tried to have some sort of AI hardware companions that you plug in, you're carrying in your pocket and so on, and then they're purely voice controlled. So like the dream of having like an AI native way, how can we interact with hardware, and also something that people own. Many companies have had that, right? But in the end, it's very expensive. All these companies, they went bankrupt because it's just complicated to do these things. They also, like the hardware was like a little bit so unstable. It was not reliable. So in the end, they have like really much adoption, and the little adoption they had poor reviews, and then on top, this required a lot of like resources. So they completely flopped. And Apple is the one that can dominate this niche, and I could see, especially so if we think about how more and more laptops and computers are just like a very niche device, and how like most normal people, they just interact with their phones, or to a lesser extent with a tablet. How if you think, okay, tablet is also a saturated market, so let's take a tablet and then plug it to some robotic arm, and then with some AI, and suddenly you have a completely new device category.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, it's to a certain extent, I see that happening, right? Like with cars, for example, like in China, Xiaomi, it's like quoted as like the Apple of China, and they basically went down the car route, and turning that into some sort of, robotic slash new interface to work with the digital world. I don't know if I want to put a robotic arm at home if someone can hack it and then it would just punch me in the face when I was just trying to cook. I think moving down the stack, so we talk about the distribution, and let's talk about Nvidia and ARM. So recently, President Trump basically came out, and probably it's part of his bid to have a deal with China, was to allow the sale of AI chip from Nvidia and ARM to China. But at the same time, he's going to levy a 15%, I would say, levy on those sale. Anything sold to China by Nvidia and ARM government will take a 50% cut of it. What are both your views on this? President Trump is basically running it like a company. I think he runs the country like a company. Everything is all about the numbers that he needs to hit. But I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on this? Because I feel like this is pretty big.
I had the same thought like you. From a Trump's perspective, actually, ingenious way of making money for the government. Basically, he's saying, look, you can also sell into the US and we have this competitive advantage. But if you really want to sell to the enemy, China, feel free. But I want to also gain from it. From that angle, it makes a lot of sense. Does an Nvidia care? Not sure. I mean, they're such a successful, they're like such a valuable company these days. If they can somehow make the business case work, they probably will pay. So in a way, maybe this could work out.
I was thinking exactly from a perspective of like a business person, but I was taking another angle in that we've had multiple shows where we've been saying how there are so many developments out of China that were basically born of the need to compete, because there was all this chip drought, there were all these export so bans and so on. Well, in the end, there are quite inventive people there. There are also resources, both so humans, so resources as well as financial resources. If they continue forbidding Nvidia or other players that sell in the Chinese market, there will be homegrown champions, and these homegrown champions, they'll take over basically the market at some point, right? We are seeing that also in our industries, right? So we're seeing, for example, the car industry, how like in Germany, the car industry is really suffering, really aching for the fact that all of a sudden Chinese cars, they're really good and they're really cheap. Nvidia could suffer the same situation if they are not able to basically continue serving the Chinese market. And it makes sense. It makes sense in basically saying, okay, you can continue selling that, maybe at a higher price and so on, but at least they can have a foothold on the market, and that leaves less incentives for local players that compete in a market that will be de facto not like close to Nvidia.
Yeah, I see both your points, but then I think the question then becomes how expensive? Who's going to absorb that 15%? Is it Nvidia or is it the end user? Because if you get the end user to absorb microeconomics wise, right? If you get the end user to absorb the cost of extra 15%, then the end user will find ways to route around the 15%, which means they will incentivize people to build something local. to at least try to compete. Second thing that comes to my head was China was obviously at some point Huaqiangbei in somewhere in Shenzhen they were saying that is silicon hardware for Silicon Valley, something like that. And I actually felt that it won't be long before they come out with their own over time. I suspect that is going to be the case. It may not be the best like H100, H200, but I think it'll be good enough to do the work. That's in general how I feel that this deal will go down.
I think we need to look at the level or the speed of development, and that is going like exponentially. And I would agree with you. Like right now, maybe the chips are not good yet, but I think just give China a little bit of time, and they're gonna catch up soon. And then the 15% deals maybe also not really that relevant anymore, obsolete. But I'm sure Trump will come up with other creative things.
Yeah. I must give President Trump the credit, right? I think he did great job in trying to make US relevant. Everything from the NATO deal down to, tariffs, down to even this kind of deals, try to grab money from the world onto onshore. And not to mention, he now is also trying to build sovereign wealth fund with funds from other country. So you have to think really like how he thinks. I give him credit for what he does, right? Like we can say whatever we want, there's method to his madness. So I think it's quite cool. Sorry, Rob, we were just talking about how, President Trump has a little bit of a method to his madness, right? He's able to find different ways to drive revenue into the country. Everything from tariff to now levies to even to managing sovereign wealth fund on behalf of Japan, for example, right? So I just find that it's quite interesting. I don't know why people put up to it, but to a certain extent, people are doing it. And the fact that people are signing those tariff deals.
I think here, so on all these discussions like tariffs and so on, there's also here two things at play. There's on one side those who are more like on the politics side and national security and so on. They'll tell you how on one side, yeah, so like banning Nvidia from selling to China, like a great thing. But at the same time, they'll tell you, oh, like introducing tariffs is bad. Whereas from a pure market perspective, so people say the opposite, right? If you take like just pure, so here those who are more in the business side, they'll tell you tariffs bad, and as well as so here non-selling to China is also bad. I rather take the perspective that in the end there are multiple ways how it's possible to stay ahead in the market. So especially like say from like a national security perspective, you say, hey, like the US or the Western world, whatever it needs to be leaning AI. This can just amount to, for example, maybe like delaying releases, maybe like offering different type of versions for one version to the other, or just through pricing, right? Like making something more expensive and therefore less competitive in one market, but not selling to China. I always never like understood it. I just thought long term that would be damaging. And I think that they can absorb a larger price because let's remember, it's not only about the hardware itself, it's also the software and the big ecosystem. And no other company, no Qualcomm, no like Intel, AMD, whatever it is, no other one has a comparable ecosystem in terms of like software and other libraries. So for quite some time, it'll be the case that Nvidia will be the leading player here. But however, if you just ban it and then stays closed for like years, then likely there'll be a Chinese player that'll be similar to Nvidia, develop its own ecosystem, and all of a sudden you'll have a very powerful competitor that is not from the West.
Yeah, I actually felt that the fact that you thought about banning Nvidia already spurred someone else's thinking around this. I bet you somewhere in China, someone that was already thinking about how do we diversify away from Nvidia. Because today they can sell it to you, tomorrow they can take it away back from you, right? It's just not a very good bet. Like today we have no choice, so we have to take it, just take it in. But in the long term, I actually think that they will try to diversify away from Nvidia to a certain extent that they can develop the technology, yada yada. But I think the fact that they mention it, it's already started the race. It's just how human minds are thinking. Great. I guess to that extend thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. We always enjoy doing these sessions and this chat, and I always learn a lot from Rod and Chris, and hope all the listeners learn something too. And this week basically we talk a little bit about ChatGPT, all the different usage around platform distribution, as well as Google's well, should I say, Perplexity's bid for Google Chrome, and all the way down to AI, AMD, Nvidia's AI chips tariff or levy by the US government. And I hope, as always, you enjoy listening to what we're trying to put together, and definitely remember to subscribe to ChrisRodMaxShow if you like what you listen to. If you have any feedback, share it with us. And Chris, Rod, any parting words?
Thank you so much. Have a happy weekend.
Exactly. So keep building, and yeah, so give us your opinions on the GPT-5 and everything else.
Cool.
Bye, everyone.